Let's bring in Daniel Kaczynski now, British Member of Parliament for the Conservative Party. Great to see you today. Thanks for joining us here on RT International. The State Department, the spokesman there, accusing Russia of the airstrikes on hospitals, but the World Health Organization report doesn't even mention Russia, to be honest. So why the blame game at this point?
Well, good morning from London, and just listening to that coverage from the State Department official is actually rather quite chilling. My experience of journalists here and professionals at RT in London is that they are a very eclectic mix of journalist professionals, highly skilled and determined to get to the truth. And it's very regrettable that he would use such words to deviate away from answering the question by actually attacking the company itself. So I think that there are lessons to be learned over the conduct of that official. With regards to your with regards to answering your question, clearly there are massive polarizing differences of opinion as to how the war in Syria is going, who is responsible, and how civilians are being caught up in this appalling and brutal war. And that's why it's very important for companies like RT to have access to be able to challenge officials when they make those sort of allegations.
We understand that in the town of Aleppo, for example, where Russia actually stopped any bombing campaigns 30 days ago, we understand militants are still doing what the UN calls indiscriminate attacks on civilians, and yet many of these rebel factions are affiliated with Al-Qaeda. We're talking the same group of terrorists that attacked New York on 9/11, and yet these factions are also getting funding and weapons from various partners in the region and various partners in the West. Why is it up to Russia to clean up the mess in Syria?
Well, it's very important for RT and others to highlight more and more at every opportunity the appalling brutality that is taking place in Syria as a result of these terrorists. And they are using humans and children as human shields. They know they can't beat Russian forces and outsiders coming in with superior weaponry, planes and capability. So they are deliberately using and targeting innocent civilians to try to win the media war game which is ensuing. This is obviously extremely dangerous. It's giving a very nuanced and clouded perspective here in the United Kingdom and throughout the West. And so I can only reiterate what I said before. It's extremely important that RT and others highlight and demonstrate to my own citizens here in the United Kingdom the reality of this situation on the ground, because we cannot continue to be fed a very one-sided perspective.
A one-sided perspective when it comes to, for example, certain media reports regarding the ongoing crisis in Syria, as you mentioned as well, various rebel or militant factions using civilians as human shields. Typically in the Western media, when something happens in Syria, it's either the Syrian government or it's Russia to blame. And moments ago you mentioned this media information war. Why is there a media information war in the first place? It's a humanitarian crisis in Syria. Surely politicking or disinformation should never be a part of this.
Well, this is why I and a small number of fellow Conservative colleagues, this is why we are absolutely determined to now ramp up the scrutiny and pressure on our own government when it comes to the way in which Anglo-Russian relations are conducted. I have used the word in the past, hysteria, and I've been condemned for that, but the anti-Russian hysteria that is pervading through political circles here in London and Washington has quite frankly played a huge role in the increased tension that exists, not only in terms of bilateral relations, but in terms of then spilling over into media wars, and each side trying to accuse the other of atrocities and inappropriate behavior. We have to go the extra mile to negotiate with the Russians, to get around the table with the Russians, to try to bring this war to an end. The world is watching and is expecting the new President of the United States, when he comes into office, to get around the table with President Putin and to try to work constructively together to try to destroy ISIS in Syria. Let's work collaboratively together. Let's set aside some of these appalling tensions that have been built up. I don't think we can see an end to the war in Syria unless the Americans and the Russians start to collaborate together more effectively on this.
And as we know, in just the past 72 hours, President-elect Donald Trump had a phone call with Vladimir Putin, and both of them reportedly agreeing to further go after terrorists in Syria. What does that mean? Because you mentioned moments ago the anti-Russian hysteria in various political circles in the UK. Trump is signaling an improvement in ties with Russia and an improvement in relations to work together in Syria. What is the effect that Trump is already having with the anti-Russian hysteria in the political circles in the UK?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. That's a fascinating question because, of course, the United Kingdom will have to somehow, hopefully, recalibrate its own position vis-à-vis Moscow when our most important strategic NATO partner starts to unwind some of the tensions with Moscow itself. It would be a rather strange and peculiar situation if NATO as a whole didn't take some sort of notice or lead from the change in the direction and policy of the United States of America. I and a few others have been calling for a radical reassessment of our relationship with Russia for a long time, and the efficacy of the sanctions that are in place against Russia. This win by Trump is very important, and actually I like to say that I know of friends of mine who are Democrats, who normally vote Democrat in the United States, who specifically voted for Trump because they were very worried at the trajectory of confrontation with Russia, which had existed under Obama and which would have been magnified under a President Clinton.